Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third and final webinar in our 10 years of free schools celebration. Before I dive in, a few bits of housekeeping as other people trickle in too. As you will have probably been notified, this session is being recorded. I'd ask that you mute yourselves so that there's no feedback. If you would like to ask questions, please do put them into the chat function as we go along and at the end during the Q&A session. We will try to get through as many questions as possible, so please do keep them coming. My name is Sophie Harrison-Byrne. I'm the recently appointed Director of the New Schools Network. As I said, this is the third and final webinar. The two previous webinars which you may have attended were hearing from very successful free school leaders about their reflections of setting up and running free schools. And last week we heard from Rachel Wolfe and Sam Friedman, two education policymakers who were intimately involved in the genesis and implementation of the policy in its early days. And we heard about the remarkable success of the policy from a standing start, but also some of their critical reflections and lessons learned from the first 10 years. And I'm delighted that today we're going to be hearing from three system leaders about their thoughts for the future of reform and where free schools will fit within that. Our first speaker, who I'm delighted to introduce, is Dame Rachel de Souza, fresh off the back of the Conservative Party conference and reportedly full of beans. Rachel is the Children's Commissioner for England. She is a nationally recognised educator and a passionate advocate of improving the life chances of disadvantaged children. Dame Rachel turned around two schools from struggling to outstanding and then went on to found and lead the Inspiration Trust, a family of 14 schools across East Anglia. The Trust has twice ranked as the top group of comprehensive schools based on pupil progress at GCSE, and she was made a Dame in 2014 for her remarkable services to education. Rachel.
Thank you so much, and it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm so excited I'm able to be here because during that time as a trust leader, as a CEO, I opened 4 free schools myself, all incredibly different, right through the early years of the movement. So I'm really proud to be here to celebrate this very exciting milestone with you all. And I want to start by paying tribute to all of you and to the NSN and to many others for your passion, tenacity and hard work. The vision that NSN, that you, that us as a group of leaders had for how schools could better serve children, how we could improve their outcomes, believing more and better was possible. People were and are fundamental to making this programme work. So thank you. When I became, one of Tony Blair's 57th, I think, academy principals back in those days, we all acknowledged that incremental school improvement wasn't going to be enough. We needed to be radical. We couldn't wait and hope that things would be improved by other people. Now, through the Free Schools programme, thousands of children have had their life chances improved and millions more have by osmosis. And I'm proud to have seen that firsthand at Inspiration Trust and at Jane Austen College, at Sir Isaac Newton Primary School, and a range of our free schools. And it's not just my view. The first thing I did on taking on the role of Children's Commissioner was to launch the Big Ask, which is now the biggest survey in the world ever of children, second actually only to the US Census in terms of overall responses. And nearly 600,000 of England's children have told me they like school, they love their teachers, and lockdown has only served to underline this importance. They understand that school will be challenging, but they still prize education as one of their top priorities. Going to a good school is not just a metric by which we measure policy success. It makes a real, tangible difference to children's lives. One boy in Year 7 told me, bad education stops some children from being able to achieve something great in life. But I am lucky because I have a great education. And the reason radical school improvement we've seen over the last decade was vital. And the reason we need to finish the job and make sure all schools are outstanding is that children's lives are impacted in the immediate and the longer term. Children who go to inadequate schools were more likely to be unhappy with school. So how did we do that? As we approach this anniversary and I was preparing for today, I've been reflecting on what the foundations, the principles were of the free school movement. Innovation. We couldn't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. We needed to take risks because the status quo wasn't working. And innovation was a strand that was right back there in those early sponsored academy days. And I was really delighted to see it revivified and brought back to life in the free school movement. And I think that's something we should be taking forward in the next 10 years. Trusting people who know children, that educationalists, people who worked with children, were best placed to know how to run a school. Parental choice, that parents had the right to choose not just the best school in their area, but the type of education they wanted their children to have. I think that was something very important about the free school movement. A relentless focus on outcomes, that educational outcomes, particularly for the most disadvantaged, needed to be our primary focus. And finally, collaboration, that the networks the programme has created run across traditional boundaries, and that's facilitated relationships that drive improvement. I think that's really important and a feature of the free school movement I'd want to take forward. And I think we can all agree that children growing up in England today are far better served by the school system than they ever have been. And let me tell you, and I've just been telling both party conferences this, one of the biggest changes and brilliant things of the last 15 years has been education reform. Frankly, schools are unrecognisable to 15 years ago. And I think, it'd be interesting. I'm sure colleagues agree on that. And I think we can all agree, that children are better served, but some still aren't. And so I want my focus to focus my answer to the question of what's next in terms of reaching those children and what's next for the free school movement. And this question goes beyond this session. And is in fact the reason I wanted to take up the role of Children's Commissioner. So the first thing, we need the programme, the free schools programme, to have better coverage. I'd love it if there's at least a free school in every local authority. There are parts of the country where education provision is still too poor. Too many children, particularly the most vulnerable, don't have the opportunity to go to a good school, and we need to use the programme strategically and tactically to make sure every corner of England, every child in England can go to a good school that helps them to become happy, successful adults. We need to support leaders to spread best practice, to open new schools, to grow their families of schools, and to make sure we don't have any cold spots. There are not just geographic cold spots though. For me, the key thing that needs to come next is capitalising on the momentum of reform, replicating it across the services that serve children. We need to approach that challenge with the same excitement, vision, ambition, and bravery that we took to education reform and the free school movement. We've made good progress already with the establishment of new special and alternative provision free schools. That's a good first step, but we must go further. I want to see far more pupils with SEND being able to be educated in free schools as they grow. There are still too many children being let down by the quality of mental health provision, with long waiting lists and not being able to access support quickly. More than half of local authorities' children's services still are not good. Imagine if the same was true for schools. I mean, Ofsted good, graded good, half of them are not good. Imagine if that was the same for schools. And if we want to finish the job of making sure every child leaves school with the results they need to reach their potential, we need to turn our energy and focus to the services that support these children, those who don't have parents pushing for them to go to an outstanding school, those for whom even the best teacher isn't enough to help them succeed or attend. And if we don't, we risk reaching an impasse on attainment. We need to smash that glass ceiling, and that is going to need our ambition and focus in exactly the same way school reform has had for the last 10 years. We're going to need it forward for the next 10. We must be just as bold and audacious. I want to finish by giving you another quote from The Big Ask, which I hope will resonate and catalyse action for you in the same way it did for me. This is a very last paragraph of our big ask conclusion. When we asked children what was holding them back in England in 2021, a 16-year-old boy told us something sad. The social stigma of children from lower class backgrounds trying to achieve something bigger than themselves. Read it again. Children from lower class backgrounds trying to achieve something bigger than themselves. We should tell them, of course, that there is nothing bigger than the lives of children. So, not to scorn ambition, we could try to build something equal to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. That's a pretty sobering comment for a child to make. And there's lots that I'm sure people want to pick up from what you've said. And just a reminder to people to please do pop questions in the chat as we go along whilst they occur to you. Our next speaker is Hamid Patel, CBE, the Chief Executive of Star Academies. He has led the trust since its inception. So Hamid is a national leader of education and sits on a number of international and national education and policy forums. Within his previous role as the executive principal of Tawheed al-Islam Girls High School, the school secured 3 outstanding Ofsted inspections and became the top school in the country for progress of all students. In recognition of his services to education, Hamid was awarded a CBE in 2015 and a knighthood in the Queen's Birthday Honours in 2021. So Hamid.
Thanks, Sophie. I joined the free school movement because I genuinely believed in its power to make a difference, and I remain a powerful advocate. The Free Schools program has undoubtedly been one of the most important educational reforms seen in this nation in the last decade. Introduced by the coalition government following the 2010 election, free schools were cornerstone of the big society agenda, which focused on giving ordinary people greater opportunity to shape their own communities and prospects. Free schools were introduced to offer local choice and drive up standards. And many of the 600 schools established so far have outstripped their counterparts in the league tables. And those that have been inspected have secured positive judgments from Ofsted at their first inspections. They represent significant financial investment in disadvantaged communities, and we're justifiably proud of them. But as Nelson Mandela famously remarked, I've discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are more hills to climb. The last 10 years has been about putting down foundations, establishing the infrastructure in which free schools can realize their mission to level up communities, towns, regions, and the country. The next 10 years must be about delivery. Many of our free schools have secured excellent public examination results in their first years of opening. These have been the outcome of focused teaching and shared enthusiasm for the freshness of a new school and a new venture. They cannot yet claim to have a strong track record of success. They've not been operating long enough to make that ingrained contribution. That will come when the numbers of young people whose life chances have been transformed by an excellent education is significant within a community. That takes time, and it isn't easy. And free schools, like all schools, have been rocked by COVID and are working hard to secure catch-up. This is essential work, but it cannot be allowed to sap our energy. Excellent examination results are hugely important. We may see GCSEs and A-levels modernized in the next 10 years. Whatever replaces them must still demand a high level of academic rigor. we have to look beyond the immediate challenges and prioritize raising standards of literacy and numeracy, the passports for all our children. This has to be the unremitting focus of free schools. We have to maintain and improve our delivery of a knowledge-rich curriculum and give our children the cultural passport and digital competence to succeed not only as British citizens, but as e-citizens. We need pupils from our free schools to compete for entry into prestigious careers. Being part of the big society, or whatever title we now give this inclusive concept, means so much more than casting a vote. It's about being enfranchised to make a difference. One of the biggest growth areas in Lancashire currently is applied cyber intelligence, highly skilled, essential work that is crucial for national security. We need to inspire pupils who may be the first in their families to consider higher education, the ambition and wherewithal to embrace this opportunity. This is what leveling up is about. This is our challenge. We have not seen gaps narrow between disadvantaged children and their peers, and indeed, COVID has widened that chasm. We need to scale up the advantages that we have provided for the pupils who have achieved highly in our first free school cohorts, so that we see evidence of educational opportunity translating into wider social opportunity. When the free school program began, we were all enthusiastic about the possibility of new freedoms to do things differently, new ways of contributing to community regeneration, the possibilities of longer opening hours and extended education services to meet the needs of families offered enticing potential. Multiple constraints have limited, impeded our progress in transforming this vision of civic leadership into reality. In the next decade, we need to refocus on this work. We know that our disadvantaged communities have never needed real practical support more desperately. We need to play our part as vibrant community hubs. Crucially, free schools were intended to become trailblazers of evidence-based innovation, learning laboratories that would develop approaches to share with the wider sector and thereby improve outcomes for all young people. Innovation and compliance are not always easy to reconcile. Schools have inevitably become inward-looking during their first years of operation, challenged by the imperatives to develop management systems, recruit staff, and meet regulatory requirements. Now is the time for us to reignite the passion for learning that inspired the free school program and move forward bravely. We have developed the infrastructure, and now we need to embrace possibility. Otherwise, we're in the danger of becoming an irrelevance, a set of schools not dissimilar from their counterparts and facing the same fluctuating result profiles and floundering reputations. We need to be open to new ways of working, challenge stereotypes, and explore the potential of new partnerships. There is room to continue setting up a small number of carefully targeted, innovative and/or specialist free schools to spur leveling up and bring new ideas. Star Academy's planned collaboration with Eton to provide groundbreaking sixth forms in areas of deprivation is an example of this. We aim to work with and learn from one of the most prestigious schools in our country to provide pathways for young people from disadvantaged communities to Russell Group universities and eventually high-status careers. This is leveling up in practice. So the next decade is our opportunity to deliver. It is our opportunity and our chance to shine. If we build on what we've achieved so far, the place of free schools as one of the great educational reforms of 21st century will have been secured. We will have made significant progress in leveling up. If not, we become irrelevant, limited to what will be seen as a school building program, not an organ of educational and social transformation. Our school system will be better for our combined efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. There are some questions coming in, so thank you for those. Keep them coming. Our third and final speaker is Martyn Oliver, the Chief Executive and Accounting Officer of Outward Grange Academies Trust and a national leader in education. Martyn leads one of the oldest and most consistently high-performing trusts in the country, which currently has 34 academies, including the one in which I trained to teach. The trust has been regularly praised for rapidly turning around failing schools, often in challenging circumstances, and obtaining excellent Ofsted inspection outcomes. Martyn, over to you.
Well, thank you, Sophie, and thank you to Dame Rachel and to Sir Hamid. So Outward Grange Academies Trust is, as Sophie said, one of the oldest school-based sponsors, having started back in 2009. And actually, as today we now approach 40 schools in our trust, and we're one of the largest secondary sponsors. We were rather late at joining the free school programme, only sponsoring one free school, and our first one in Middlesbrough in 2019. But when I reflect upon our journey, our focus has always been on transforming schools that are broken. But taking on a free school was an opportunity for us to actually develop innovative practice and not just add another school to the trust. I'm delighted that our free school in Middlesbrough is going to be placed in as a part of the whole borough regeneration programme. And even though we already have 2 schools in the centre, the local authority were very keen that Outward opened this school, and we were very keen that it was very different to all of our existing schools. So when I build upon what Dame Rachel and Sir Hamid have said, I think we reflect back to the original challenge of free schools, which is about addressing need, whether it was parental choice, whether it was pupil place planning issues, or whether it was a paucity of performance that required a positive disruptor. So going forward, I think that the free school movement, as Sir Hamid said, must not just be seen to be a replication of the existing practice and a part of the status quo, as it will become irrelevant. But when I reflect upon actually the schools of Dame Rachel when she was the Chief Executive of Inspiration, Sir Hamid in Star, or in the previous speakers on this series, whether it's Ed Van Care's Reach Academy Feltenham or Catherine Bilbossing's Michaela School, some of them are quite small schools, and yet the power of their performance has been exceptional. They have transformed the country's entire education practice. The number of people now that will respond to Catherine's social media account and take forward the Michaela practices in their schools is truly quite remarkable, and something that should be celebrated and captured. I also believe that the free school programme, partly due to people like Catherine, Sir Hamid, Dame Rachel and Ed, have actually been a part of the drive for the evidence-led practice, which surely must continue in the sector. So going back to what can be different about free schools in the future, I think there are 4 very clear things to focus on for the New Schools Network. One, that it must continue to be at the forefront of driving up standards. There is an issue regarding levelling up. And when I looked at the map to remind myself where all of the 600 current and the 200 free schools are that are in the pipeline right now, when you go north of West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, that Leeds point, go north of Leeds, the number is still too low. And as Dame Rachel said, there should at least be 1 free school in every single local authority. So we need to look at the levelling up agenda that was announced by the Prime Minister today and consider what is the role of free schools in levelling up and supporting areas that have been left behind, which inevitably leads to the north-south divide. Then I also look at the enhanced provision and the special provision and the need for greater support to children who have been left out of the system. There's a sobering fact that something like 750,000 children in the years before the pandemic were persistently absent. 750,000 children. That's something like 1 in 9, 1 in 10 children are persistently absent. And we have to accept the fact that the normal school clearly isn't performing for them. So there has to be enhanced provision, a holistic approach. And again, I look to the work of Reach Academy Feltenham, and I look at the work of an all-through school and the support it has to families from, I think, as Ed calls it, from cradle to career, and the community provision that he puts in place. Schools during the pandemic have been the bastion of support to many families. We've fed them, we've clothed them, we've supported them. Surely the free school network as it goes forward, and the free school movement as it goes forward, must be a continuation of that and address the needs of those 750,000 pupils who are still persistently absent every single year. So I leave this speech not wanting to replicate Dame Rachel and Sir Hamid, but by saying addressing the need, challenging the status quo, and being, as academies were when we first started in 2009, a positive disruptor to the education system. And how we continue to do that in the free school movement, I think, will be the test of our success in the future and the years to come. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you so much, Martyn, and thank you, Sir Hamid and Dame Rachel. There is one question, but just before we dive into that, seeing as there's a little spare time before the questions, Martyn, I wondered whether you would be able to tell us a little bit more about what kind of innovation you have pursued in your free schools. Seeing as you came to the programme a bit late, it would be fascinating to hear what it's allowed you to do and how that might have influenced the practice in the rest of the Outward schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we were certain about, even though we have probably, one could argue, the most experience in turning around a large number of special measures inadequate schools, especially secondary schools, and we now have something like 28,500 children just in a tight geographical location. We were very clear that the opportunity to open a free school was not a replication of a 40th school in the family. There had to be something different, and it allowed us the opportunity, rather than trying to repair and rebuild, what happens if you start from fresh? And so we started with this idea that we would stick to the basic principles of an Outward Academy, but if you like, we would want to see it accelerated. We would want to take the very best practice. And so that started by going to visit Inspiration, Star and Michaela, and then looking at the practice of those schools and other great schools, like, for example, the Dixon's free schools. How could we take that very best practice, embed it within the Outward family, and then actually lead? And so now if you walk into the free school in Middlesbrough, even though it only has year 7 and year 8, it is actually now driving practice, which has informed the other 39 schools, mostly around routine, setting up very clear, very structured routines, learnt very heavily from the work of Dixon's. Those routines are enabling children to have a sense of support and network within the school, which is addressing their persistent absence. It's no surprise that the free school, compared to 7 other close geographical Outward schools, has attendance 5% higher than even the next best one in the area, even though it has the highest number of free school meals pupil premium students. It runs at 60%. So it is all about focusing on building from the start and developing those routines. And then lastly, it's also about giving parents that choice. As I said, for those of you who know Middlesbrough, it rather has a famous transporter bridge right next to the Riverside football stadium, and Middlesbrough football stadium is a religion in the area. And we had a free school open day, and we ran it on a Saturday, and 200 parents came, even though the football match was on in the stadium, which casts a shadow over the temporary school before it moves into its permanent position. And so I think that it's clearly a desperate need for the parents to see something new and something fresh. And we're really looking forward in that 11 to 16 school, by the time the students get to 16, in being able to attend one of the Eton Star post-16 schools in the same area. And we are sure that we can develop a pipeline from the 11 to 16 school through to the 16 to 18 Star Eton provision.
Thank you. And you know, what has been said about the very collaborative nature of free schools and the disproportionate impact their wider system is incredible, and is something that I was discussing at Labour Party conference just last week. I'm pleased to say that questions are coming in, so I'm going to go in chronological order. So a question for all of the panel, so I'll come to you each in turn. What can be done to encourage groups to apply to open free schools in those cold spots or traditionally left behind areas? Should prospective free school leaders be offered incentives, and what might those look like? And so, Hamid, do you want to kick us off?
I think there's an opportunity for the department to introduce targeted rounds. So rounds where the department asks for targeted applications for areas that are identified as cold spots, so social mobility cold spots. Over the last sort of 5 or 6 or 7 rounds, there is a greater focus on basic need. So there is a greater focus on basic need and the sort of innovation and creativity that was once the sort of hallmark of the program has unfortunately been sort of, to some extent, been lost, and there's a need to sort of regain that sort of innovation and creativity, so that the program becomes a program that isn't just about basic need, but it's also about standards, it's also about innovation, it's also about transformation and so on. So I think I think something that would help, yes, we have wave 15, wave 16, when they will be announced, and hopefully they will be announced following the spending review. What we also need to see are sort of targeted rounds. So for the department or for the government to identify the sort of cold spots and say, these are the areas where we're targeting for leveling up, and these are the areas we want the free schools. And I think by providing that sort of clarity, it sort of focuses the applications, and it focuses people know that if I'm going to invest a significant amount of time, then I'm going to get a return for my investment. Otherwise, you could spend a lot of time working on applications and get nothing. So I think there's something around that. I think there's also a need to have there's also a need to look at academy trusts that are operating as sort of in and around those cold spot areas, and incentivizing those academy trusts to sort of put forward applications. I think those sort of strategic conversations are necessary to sort of ensure that we reach all the parts of the country that we need to reach. So I think some sort of strategic sort of conversations and sort of with sort of targeted academy trusts would be advantageous in this space as well.
Thank you. I think that first hurdle of knowing that where you're applying for a free school there is an agreed need takes a lot of the work out of the process. And yeah, maybe a question for Martyn to pick up when he answers this question, but what kind of incentives would take outward to a new area in any specific proposals?
So actually Outward are about to go to a brand new area. We are about to sponsor 2 more schools that are in special measures in a brand new region on the outskirts of Liverpool, around St Helens and Wigan. And so how do you do that? Well, you need to open a cluster of schools. Schools, I think, should now be in strong families of schools. Originally, it talked about setting up small and independent groups, but I think we've clearly seen, especially during the pandemic, that large, strong families of schools and groups of schools can provide really robust support when challenges arise. If I try to address the question of saying, well, I think you need to be within a strong family of schools. I think you need a group of schools, so you get a number of them, which allows you to then have the support network. But I think there's a crucial problem. If I go back to what I was trying to say before, which is about the free schools addressing need, and if I look at the number of children persistently absent, you look at the number of children that require special, enhanced, alternative provision, there is a problem at the moment in that you cannot open easily an alternative provision school because of the way that the funding route is worked out. The last school Outward has opened is actually one we just built ourselves. A school we sponsored, which is the worst in England, had a closed sixth form building. So we took the sixth form building and we made our own alternative provision, independent alternative provision. We were lucky because the capital existed in the shape of an empty building. But I can't open a single alternative provision, even though I'm desperate to, around all of my other schools, because all of the funding and the application is locked into the local authority, who need no more alternative provision against their high needs block. Well, that's not solving the problem for the children who are not getting good provision. So there needs to be a root and branch look at how children are supported who are not attending school, and where the funding originally goes, and how that is then placed into the hands of innovative people, like the people like Elliot on the chat, and Sir Hamid and Rachel and myself. And then I think my last point on that is that so many free schools at the moment seem to be just addressing pupil place need. And it's just going to become a building program, as Sir Hamid said in his speech. And I think we've got to also say there has to be a percentage of the schools that are built which are positive disruptors to poor performance, nothing to do with pupil place planning need, but actually providing competition. I'm not in the slightest bit scared that Sir Hamid's moving into Middlesbrough. I welcome him moving into Middlesbrough. I'll try harder to perform because he is.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, I couldn't agree more in terms of alternative provision. There's only been 2 open through the free school mechanism in recent years. And I'm obviously going to hand over to Rachel. I'm sure she has things to say about this, but it's not good enough for children that are not thriving. Rachel, I'm aware there are quite a few questions, so could I ask you to wrap up that one, but also pick up on the second one, which is just speaking to the opportunity that a free school provides as a blank piece of paper to do something different, and how you think, given the wealth of insight you've recently gained from children, how future of them could be used to tackle some of those structural issues.
Yeah, and try and link those together. I mean,
there's quite a lot there.
Yeah, just to go back to when I got my first inspiration in these things, I spent quite a bit of time in New York and New Orleans and looking at the charter school movement, where parents were so desperate that they were, and teachers were so desperate, they were opening new schools on floors of massive, 5,000 children schools with massive, I remember going into this New York County school which had 5,000 kids and had they were so worried about weapons, you had to almost go through airport security and be frisked and put your bags through airport security. And so a group of teachers on the floor of that school opened a languages charter school, tiny little charter school with a specialist provision for languages. It was amazing that you were in the same building, but you could walk onto this floor and you were suddenly in this creative, rigorous learning, institution in the middle of this chaos. And again, parents opening schools, charter schools in New York, in floors of halls, and just making the best of the space they had, and it becoming so popular, that charter movement, that when the mayor of New York said he wanted to close the charters, basically massive groups of parents going to sit in outside his office and demand their schools to be open. I'd like to see a bit of that vigor in some of our, I'm not suggesting a sit-in to the mayor, but I do think that vigor of using space, of creating the schools we need, and being able to do that. And I look at my friends up in Cumbria and Northumberland who can't get a free school open because they're saying there's no pupil need, and yet there are so many 3 times RI schools. What's going on there? So we need to unlock some of this. And I look around, coastal schools and see, seen sad underperformance for many years and the desperate need for new provision. And yet there's loads of space, there's loads of potential buildings we could use. I opened a free school in a fire station. I opened a free school in an old shoe factory. They're beautiful beautiful free schools. I used an old bank, 70s shopping building to open one of our free schools. All those 3 are outstanding, or one is good with outstanding. But so I think there's something about that looking around our space, looking at need, and coming up with really creative solutions, and getting the DFE to learn to love that innovation again, because out of that came something really special and something that children needed. And that plays to Martyn's point around, what are the kids not getting? The AP, the kids who are not going into school and are not being well served by school. So I think that's really important. And also what do they need to learn? I mean, I opened a maths and science preschool, 16 to 18 preschool, because there we were in sort of Norfolk, with the offshore industry, the energy industry, some of the best potential, science employers, and only, I think it was fewer than 1,000 children in the whole of Norfolk doing maths GCSE, maths A level, and fewer than 300 doing physics in the whole of Norfolk. So, there are different ways of showing need, and there are different ways of creating opportunity. And I do think, what have the kids told us? I mean, the Big S survey, they've told us they want great jobs and careers. They want educational pathways that get them to those. They want a greener, fairer future. And I think those can all give us pointers to school design. They want places to go, things to do. They want to play. They want to get off the digital labyrinth. They want to use space differently. I think all of those give us loads of pointers for both school design, what schools can look like, what schools can do in a 24-hour period, how schools can truly meet children's needs, and what they can be offering, and what distinct offers they can have linked to employment in areas, and a range of things. All of these are different ways of filling in the blank sheet of paper. Now, what we need is for our wonderful Department for Education and ministers to grab the vision and like be bold again, and I'm sure we can all succeed if they can do that. So that's my dream. Sorry, I gave you a lot there, but there you are.
No, absolutely. And I think a really interesting thing that Rachel and Sam noted last week was, in terms of becoming part of the furniture, free schools are almost a victim of their own success, in that they've been so successful, they are so accepted, and that can kind of contribute to what you've just touched on. But absolutely. Few other questions. So 2 that are quite specific about the actual process of applying, which you have all done several times and are probably absolute pros at. In terms of applying and the application criteria, what do they need to look like? So what in the process needs to change, so that we do return to that more that higher tolerance of risk, a greater appetite for risk and innovation. And is there anything in particular that you think would make it easier for that type of free school to open? And I'm going to throw that out to whoever wants to jump in first.
I mean, I don't know if just to get things going, I think governance is key. So I think that the DFE can take a lot of comfort when considering applications from governance that knows what it's doing, and strong governance, whether that's governance of a trust or a family of schools, or governance of for a group of schools. I as well as applying for lots of free schools, I actually was on an RSC board and spent a lot of time signing off and approving free schools, and always the trust and the governance was critical. Do they genuinely have an educational vision? Have they really thought it through? And do they understand what it takes to be successful, as well as having the creative vision? So I just sort of think pointing out governance could give a lot of comfort. Strong governance could give a lot of comfort to the department in terms of those applications.
Martyn, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, well, so I think more than ever, given the call upon the public purse from the pandemic, I think it's about value for money, and it's been perhaps sometimes a difficult process, trying to demonstrate, for example, around getting the place actually built. Here's a challenge to the department. I'm utterly certain that Outwood can now build a school better and cheaper than they can. And yet we have to rely upon some of the criteria for buildings, whether it's the Building Bulletin 106 and different aspects of it, which actually can be very frustrating, and it can work to a particular type. And so I think a part of the process and a part of the form has to allow for a sense of risk appetite, and the value for money can come from innovative solutions, as Rachel said, to the type of building, to how you'll use the building, to actually the use of the school day, to getting better pupil place planning data, although the New Schools Network have been superb at helping in that, when local authorities have been less perhaps, or more difficult when you're trying to develop that, especially if you're opening a free school that's on the boundary of 1, 2 or even 3 local authorities, where the pupil place planning need can be quite difficult to evidence. So my point would be, there has to be a sense of risk. There has to be a number of schools, as I said before, which are there for the sole purpose to be positive disruptors, and therefore the risk has to be accepted by the department, and they have to accept innovative solutions as to how the schools will be built. And then I think that also, if you look at the existing trusts, the large system trusts that do a lot of building work, I mean, it's like £60 million worth of building work in the last couple of years alone across Outwood. And then you look at those schools and the trust like Star that got numerous, and Dixon's numerous free schools. Well, we've got a lot of experience in building these, and I'd encourage people to come to those that have done it before, and to use us to try and demonstrate how value for money can be evidenced.
Absolutely, and that's always been the value of the network in this particular process, is not letting people kind of try to reinvent the wheel or figure things out again. So Hamid, any thoughts from you?
No, I agree with everything that Rachel and Martyn have said. The difficulty and challenge with any sort of innovative creativity sort of program is that people start off with all the right sort of with all the right intentions, and you start off with real innovation and creativity, and then you get some fantastic outcomes because you've done some really good stuff. And then the bureaucrats catch up and they say, well, we love the outcomes, but we don't like the sort of the innovative bit. We don't like, there's too much risk here, there's too much X, Y, and Z. And that's when the sort of red tape comes, and that's when you start to sort of, so then you start to say to people, we love the outcomes, we love what free schools have achieved, but we're now going to sort of change the application process. We're now going to limit you in this way, we're going to limit you in that way. And that then sort of remove, but yet we still want the same outcome that we had with free schools. And when they don't get that outcome, then they ask why you haven't got that outcome, because perhaps the theory of change as sort of is not what you had for your sort of initial sort of program of innovation. And that's always a problem. That's a problem for government. That's a problem for any sort of academy trust like ours, where you start off with a lot of sort of flexibility for people on the ground, and then you sort of have to balance that with sort of risk and other sort of regulatory and compliance requirements, and you start to sort of then sort of curb that sort of innovation. And department needs to try and I think they need to just sort of step back and give the sort of system that space for innovation, creativity again. As far as the actual application process is concerned, over the years, it has become slightly tougher. It's become more targeted. There's less money, and therefore, new groups have to sort of do a sort of a comprehensive sort of exercise before they feel confident that they'll be successful. As Martyn said, and as you've said, Sophie, the network is there. Our academy trusts are there, Inspiration is there, Outwood is there, Star's there. Can reach out to us. We will work with yourselves if you're looking to submit an application, wave 15, wave 16, will work with yourselves and will help you sort of ensure that you have an application that sort of meets the sort of red tape requirements.
Thank you. That's incredibly kind, and I think you've summarised one of the key tensions and issues incredibly well there, and you touched on it in your opening remarks about the tension between innovation and accountability. And it's an example I always fall back on. It's professed that the department want to see the next Ed Venker, the next Catherine Birbalsingh, and that is exactly what you're saying. They want that outcome, but they've radically changed the process that saw those new providers enter the system. Thank you. I think we've got time for maybe one or two of our final questions, and perhaps this might be one for you to take, so Hamid, given that you're about to open these specialist sixth forms. Does it make a difference at which stage in their education a child gains access to the type of innovative education driven by free schools?
That's a tough question. I looked at that question and I thought, I don't know the answer. It depends what day you catch me on, because if you catch me on I would have, initially we started with secondary schools, and I would say secondary schools is where you want to be. That's where you sort of make the greatest impact, and that's where there's the greatest opportunity. Then I got involved with primary schools, and for a while I wasn't interested in them too much. But then I fell in love with early years, and I started to see the impact with early reading and some of the sort of early interventions, and how that could sort of completely change the sort of the track for a young person if you intervene early and if you get the sort of the basics of literacy, numeracy right. And then, of course, there's the power of A levels and sixth forms. So I don't know. I'm going to sit on the fence with this one. I'm going to let Rachel and Martyn deal with this. I think. I get a lot of parents who miss out on coming to our primary schools, and I say, well, don't worry about it. You still got an opportunity to come at secondary, and sometimes I get many parents who come to me at secondary and say we miss out, and I say, don't worry about it. You got an opportunity to come at sixth form. So I would say that having the free school experience at some stage in your schooling sort of journey is better than not having that. But in terms of where exactly is the sort of most advantageous intervention, and let the Children's Commission answer that.
You're going to have to set up a university so you can assure people that miss out on the sixth form. Rachel, any final thoughts on that? Oh, you're on mute.
I feel very sympathetic with Hamid's response there, but I probably can be drawn on this. I mean, I think the data shows us that if children don't meet their EIYFS goals, that's probably an intervention there is probably the single most important thing for value add at 16. We know the data shows that. So I'm definitely going to go down the low end. When I was asked by the then Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Liz Truss, with all her economists and great brains, and then Nodge Unit and everybody, where should we spend the pound best for children? In the end, where I came down was to make sure every 11-year-old had reached the national standard in reading, writing, maths. If we got there, we'd pretty much probably had the biggest impact and set them up for life. So, and I did manage to persuade all the economists in the Treasury of this as well at that point. So I clearly was on fire that day. So I would go, even though I've been a secondary head principal myself, and I've had a mixed portfolio of schools of primary, secondary, nursery and sixth form. I think early years and primary, I would say if I had to choose, that's where I'd do it.
Thank you. That sounds like a daunting task, grappling with the economists. I'm going to...
Real life experience, Sophie, beats economists every time. A bit of real life experience.
We're going to finish with one final question, and it's a biggie, but I'm going to give it to Martyn because you didn't have to deal with that one. But it's one about independent and unregulated AP. Should it be incorporated into the free school programme? And if so, how can those existing AP providers be incentivised to come into the fold?
Okay, I'm just going to quickly touch upon that last one, because it's a very, just to say, incredibly similar to Sir Hamid there. In the journey. And yes, Elliot, I think it should be about addressing need, and I would advocate really strongly that all through is an opportunity, not just because it's literally from early years through to post 16, but because of the family hub work that you can do around that space. And then to go to the alternative provision, not for the sake of it, it should be about addressing need, and I couldn't possibly profess whether all regulated and unregulated AP is meeting the need right now, but I'm sure that in both camps some are. And so therefore it shouldn't be for the sake of it, but I do think that ideally all provision should be regulated. I think it should be held accountable by the independent inspectorate. I think that's hugely important. Not least for comfort for parents, but also because of the work on safeguarding and the fact that it gives Parliament an overview of the practice that's taking place across the whole country. So I would agree from that point. I think there's a lot of capital revenue positions out there that can then be brought into, which will save some of the taxpayer money. And so if that's a route through, then I would certainly encourage it. But I'll go back to my final point, which must be it can't be to replicate standard or status quo provision. If we do that, then the free school movement has just become a part of the mainstream, and somebody will be saying in 10 years from now, what's the new version of free schools, because it's no longer had that positive influence. So it has to be the very best alternative provision, the most evidence-led, with the highest success. So my challenge would be, where are the celebrated alternative provision free schools going to come from, which will do what Michaela has done for the free school movement for secondaries? Where is that practice? That's what we should start to shine the light on, and go back to those 750,000 children who are persistently absent every single year.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for taking that quite big question at the end. And we have a few minutes left, which just leaves me to thank all three of you for your time and for all of your thoughts. It's been really very interesting hearing your reflections and what you think needs to come back to the programme. And I generally couldn't agree more with all of the points that have been made. And yes, all through is the answer as the comments are coming in. So thank you all to our delegates. And just a reminder that there will be the final part of our 10-year celebration is the publication of a resource, which I'm sure we'll be sharing with you. And please do visit NSN's website as we have other events upcoming, which we'd love you to attend if they are of use to you. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely evening. Bye.